Look up. Look up at the sky tonight. What do you see? Stars. Thousands of them, maybe millions. For most of human history, people could only look at those lights. They could dream, they could wonder, but they could not go there. Then something changed. In the 20th century, the 1900s, human beings did something almost impossible. They built machines powerful enough to leave the earth. They flew beyond the sky. They walked on the moon. But this story did not begin with rockets. It did not begin with astronauts in silver suits. It began with a few lonely dreamers, people who looked up at the stars and asked one simple question: what if we could go there? This is the story of space exploration. Hi, and welcome to Daily English Origins. Are you learning English? Great. Let's learn English with a very interesting story. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment. Let's get started. Long before rockets, long before satellites, long before astronauts, human beings dreamed of the stars. Ancient people looked up at the night sky and felt something powerful. They felt wonder. Wonder means a feeling of amazement, a feeling that something is beautiful and mysterious at the same time. The Egyptians built their pyramids to align with the stars. The Greeks named the planets after their gods. Sailors used stars to cross oceans. People everywhere believed the sky held secrets. They wanted to understand those secrets, but for thousands of years, the sky was untouchable. Untouchable means something you cannot reach or hold. The stars were beautiful. The stars were distant. The stars were there, and humans were stuck here on the ground. That gap, the space between the earth and the stars, seemed impossible to cross. But some people refused to accept that. Some people believed that one day humans would find a way. Those people were dreamers, and every great journey begins with a dream. Our story begins in a small wooden house in Russia. The year is 1857. A boy is born in a village called Izhevskoy. His name is Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. Konstantin had a difficult childhood. When he was 10 years old, he became very sick with scarlet fever. Scarlet fever is a dangerous illness caused by bacteria. It causes a high temperature and a red rash on the skin. The illness left Konstantin mostly deaf. Deaf means he could not hear well. He could not attend a regular school. He could not talk with friends easily. But Konstantin had something no illness could take away: his mind. He stayed home and read books. He read science books. He read mathematics. He read the science fiction novels of Jules Verne, a French writer who imagined stories about submarines and trips to the moon. Those stories lit a fire inside Konstantin. He began to ask, could a machine really fly to the moon? Is that science fiction? Or could it be science fact? He moved to Moscow to study. He was poor. He ate only bread and water to save money for books. He was alone. But he kept reading. He kept thinking. He kept dreaming. And slowly, this deaf boy from a small Russian village began to solve one of the greatest puzzles in human history. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky became a school teacher. He taught mathematics in a small town called Kaluga. But at night, after his students went home, he sat at his desk and worked on something extraordinary. Extraordinary means very unusual and amazing. He was trying to answer one question. How much power does a rocket need to escape the Earth's gravity? Gravity is the force that pulls everything down toward Earth. It is what keeps your feet on the ground. It is what makes an apple fall from a tree. To go to space, a rocket must be powerful enough to break free from this force. In 1903, Tsiolkovsky published a paper. A paper is a scientific article, a piece of writing that shares new ideas with other scientists. His paper was called The Exploration of Cosmic Space by Means of Reaction Devices. It was the first time anyone had written a serious scientific explanation of how a rocket could fly to space. He described liquid-fueled rockets. He described multi-stage rockets, rockets made of several sections that fall away as the fuel burns, making the rocket lighter and faster. He described using liquid oxygen and liquid hydrogen as fuel. These ideas seem normal to us today, but in 1903 they were radical. Radical means completely new and different. Ideas that shocked people. Almost nobody read his paper. Almost nobody believed him. But Tsiolkovsky kept writing. He had a famous saying. He said, "Earth is the cradle of humanity, but one cannot remain in the cradle forever." He knew one day the world would listen. While Tsiolkovsky was writing in Russia, a young boy in Massachusetts, USA, was climbing a cherry tree. His name was Robert Goddard. The year was 1899. He was 17 years old. Sitting in that tree, he looked up at the sky and had a vision. A vision is a powerful mental image, like a dream you have while you are awake. He imagined a spinning device flying up into the sky, going higher and higher, all the way to Mars. He climbed down from the tree, and he decided that building that device would be the mission of his life. Robert Goddard studied physics at university. Physics is the science that studies how matter and energy work, how things move, how forces push and pull. He became a professor, a teacher at a university. But secretly, in a field in his aunt's farm in Auburn, Massachusetts, he was building something that had never been built before. In 1926, Robert Goddard launched the world's first liquid-fueled rocket. The rocket was small. It flew for only 2.5 seconds. It reached a height of only 12 meters. To some people, it seemed like nothing. But Goddard knew the truth. He had just proved that it was possible. He wrote in his diary, "It looked almost magical as it rose. The sky was no longer untouchable. The door to space had been opened, just a crack." In Germany, in the 1930s, a young man was reading a book about astronomy. His name was Wernher von Braun. He was a teenager. He was brilliant, and he was completely obsessed with space travel. When Werner read about rockets, he did not see weapons. He saw spacecraft. He dreamed of building a rocket that could carry humans to other planets. He joined a group called the Verein für Raumschifffahrt, or in English, the Society for Space Travel. Enthusiasts are people who love a subject very deeply and spend a lot of time on it. They had almost no money. They built small rockets in a field. Many of those rockets failed. They exploded. They fell over. They went sideways instead of up. But they kept trying. Then the German military came to visit. A general named Walter Dornberger watched their rockets. He was impressed. He offered them money, government money, to build bigger rockets. Werner had to make a difficult choice. He could take the military's money and build powerful rockets. But those rockets would be used as weapons. He accepted. He told himself he would use the military's resources to advance rocket science. He told himself that one day those same rockets could take humans to space. But history would judge that choice harshly, very harshly. World War II began in 1939. Germany was at war with much of the world. Werner von Braun went to work at a secret military base called Peenemünde. There, with hundreds of engineers, he built something that the world had never seen. It was called the V-2 rocket. The V-2 was the first ballistic missile. A ballistic missile is a powerful rocket weapon that travels in a high arc. The V-2 stood 14 meters tall. It burned alcohol and liquid oxygen as fuel. It could fly over 200 kilometers. It traveled faster than the speed of sound. That means no one could hear it coming. There was no warning. Germany fired thousands of V-2 rockets at London, Antwerp, and other cities. Thousands of people died. But here is the terrible irony. An irony is when something causes the opposite result of what you might expect. The same rocket that was built to destroy cities was also the first machine to reach the edge of space. The V-2 flew to an altitude of about 80 to 100 kilometers, the boundary where Earth's atmosphere ends and space begins. Werner von Braun had reached the edge of space, but he had done it with a weapon. And that shadow, that dark history, would follow him for the rest of his life. World War II ended in 1945. Germany surrendered. But the story of rockets was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. When World War II ended, two superpowers emerged. A superpower is a nation with enormous military, economic, and political strength. A nation that can influence the whole world. Those two superpowers were the United States and the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union was a huge communist country that covered much of Europe and Asia. It was led by the government in Moscow, Russia. Communism is a political system where the government controls most land, businesses, and resources and tries to create an equal society, at least in theory. The United States was a democratic and capitalist country. Democracy means the people choose their government through elections. Capitalism means businesses are privately owned and people can compete freely in the economy. These two systems were completely different. These two nations did not trust each other. They were not at war, but they were also not at peace. This dangerous in-between period is called the Cold War. The Cold War was a war of ideas, of technology, and of fear. Both nations understood one thing: whoever controlled the most powerful technology would control the future. And both nations had noticed the same thing about the V-2 rocket. They both raced into Germany as the war ended. They both searched for German rocket scientists. They both wanted those secrets. The Americans found Wernher von Braun. He surrendered to the Americans and was brought to the United States in a secret program called Operation Paperclip. Over 100 German rocket scientists came with him. The Soviets found the V-2 rocket blueprints, the detailed technical plans, and recruited their own engineers. The starting pistol of the greatest technological race in human history had just been fired. Two giant nations, two powerful dreams, one sky. The space race had begun. It was October 4th, 1957, a quiet Friday evening. Most Americans were at home. Some were watching television, some were putting their children to bed. The world felt normal. Then the radio stations began to broadcast a strange sound. Beep, beep, beep. It came from the sky. The Soviet Union had just launched the world's first artificial satellite into orbit. An artificial satellite is one made by humans, not a natural moon, but a machine. They called it Sputnik. In Russian, the word means traveling companion. A companion is a friend who travels with you. Sputnik was not large. It was a metal sphere, a ball, about 58 centimeters wide, about the size of a beach ball. It weighed only 83 kilograms. But what it did was enormous. For the first time in human history, a human-made object was circling the Earth in space. Every 96 minutes, Sputnik completed one full orbit. Every 96 minutes, it passed over American cities, over American military bases, over the White House. And it beeped. That beep, beep, beep terrified Americans. If the Soviets could put a satellite in space, they could also put a nuclear weapon in space. A nuclear weapon is an extremely powerful bomb that can destroy an entire city. The United States realized something painful. They were losing the space race, and they had barely even started. To understand how the Soviet Union moved so fast, you need to know one name, Sergei Korolev. Most people in the world had never heard of him. The Soviet government kept his identity secret for many years. He was listed only as the chief designer. His real name was forbidden from newspapers and public records. But inside the Soviet space program, everyone knew the truth. Korolev was the genius behind everything. Sergei Korolev was born in Ukraine in 1907. As a young man, he became obsessed with aviation, the science and practice of flying aircraft. He studied engineering and began designing gliders and small aircraft. But in 1938, something terrible happened. The Soviet dictator, an absolute ruler with total power, was Joseph Stalin. Stalin was deeply paranoid. Paranoid means believing that people are plotting against you even when they are not. Stalin arrested thousands of scientists, soldiers, and intellectuals, educated people like professors and engineers, believing they were enemies of the state. Korolev was arrested. He was sent to a gulag, a brutal Soviet prison camp in the frozen wilderness of Siberia. He nearly died there. His health was permanently damaged. When World War II began, he was released because the military needed engineers. Korolev survived, and he was angry, and he was brilliant, and he was determined to prove something to the world. He took the German V-2 rocket designs that the Soviets had captured and improved them dramatically. He built the R-7, a massive rocket, the first in the world capable of carrying a nuclear warhead across continents. But Korolev's true dream was never war. His true dream was space. He convinced the Soviet government that a satellite program would prove Soviet technological superiority. Superiority means being better or more advanced than others. The government agreed. And so on that quiet October night in 1957, Korolev watched his rocket rise into the dark sky and listened to the beep. He wept. After Sputnik, both the United States and the Soviet Union raced toward the next great prize. Could a human being survive in space? Nobody knew for certain. Space is a vacuum. A vacuum means completely empty, with no air, no pressure, no breathable oxygen. Scientists were not even sure what would happen to the human body in zero gravity. Zero gravity means the condition in space where there is no feeling of weight. Objects float freely. The Soviets moved first. Again, on April 12, 1961, a young Soviet Air Force pilot sat inside a small capsule on top of a massive rocket. His name was Yuri Gagarin. Yuri was 27 years old. He had an ordinary background. His father was a carpenter. His mother worked on a collective farm. A collective farm is a large farm owned and managed by the government under the Soviet system. He was chosen not only for his skills, but for his personality. He was calm, he was brave, and he smiled easily. A wide, warm, famous smile. As the countdown reached 0, Gagarin said one word into the radio, Poyechali. In Russian, it means, let's go. The rocket fired. Gagarin rose into the sky. He entered orbit. He looked out the small window of his capsule and saw the Earth below him, a blue and white sphere glowing against the darkness of space. He said, "The Earth is blue. How wonderful! It is amazing." 108 minutes later, he returned to Earth, parachuting safely into a field in Russia. Yuri Gagarin had become the first human being in space. The world celebrated. The Soviets had done it again. They had beaten the Americans again. In the United States, there was shock, there was embarrassment, and there was a growing feeling of urgency. Urgency means a strong need to act quickly. Something had to change. On May 25th, 1961, just 43 days after Gagarin's flight, the President of the United States stood before the United States Congress and made an announcement that stunned the world. His name was John F. Kennedy. Kennedy was young, 43 years old. He was energetic and ambitious. Ambitious means having strong desire and determination to achieve great things. He looked at the members of Congress and he said these words, "I believe that this nation should commit itself to achieving the goal, before this decade is out, of landing a man on the moon and returning him safely to the earth." The decade, the 10-year period he was referring to, was the 1960s. The moon by 1969. It was an extraordinary promise. No human had ever gone beyond Earth orbit. No human had set foot anywhere except Earth. The technology needed for a moon landing barely existed. But Kennedy understood something important. The space race was not only about science, it was about belief. It was about showing the world which system, communism or democracy, could achieve more. He made his most famous speech on September 12, 1962, at Rice University in Houston, Texas. He said, "We choose to go to the moon in this decade and do the other things, not because they are easy, but because they are hard." Those words became one of the most famous sentences in American history. The moon was now the finish line of the greatest race humanity had ever run. Kennedy had made his promise. Now America had to deliver. The agency responsible for making it happen was NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Aeronautics is the science of designing and flying aircraft. NASA was created in 1958, just 1 year after Sputnik. NASA needed astronauts. An astronaut is literally a star sailor. NASA selected 7 military test pilots. These were brave men used to danger. They were introduced to the American public in April 1959. The newspapers called them the Mercury 7. Their names became famous: John Glenn, Alan Shepard, Gus Grissom, Scott Carpenter, Gordon Cooper, Wally Schirra, and Deke Slayton. These men represented something important to America. They were not politicians. They were not movie stars. They were ordinary men, fathers, husbands, small-town boys from across the country, who were willing to sit on top of a rocket and fly into the unknown. On May 5th, 1961, just 3 weeks after Gagarin's flight, Alan Shepard became the first American in space. His flight lasted only 15 minutes. It was a small step compared to Gagarin's full orbit. But America was finally in the race. The Project Mercury flights continued. Then came Project Gemini, a series of missions that practiced the techniques needed to reach the moon. Docking spacecraft together, spacewalks, extended flights of up to 2 weeks. Every mission taught NASA something new. Every failure, and there were painful failures, made them stronger. As the 1960s moved forward, the pressure grew enormous. Enormous means extremely large, much bigger than expected. NASA was racing against time and against the Soviets. The engineers were tired, the schedules were rushed, and warnings were sometimes ignored. On January 27, 1967, 3 astronauts climbed into the Apollo 1 capsule for a routine test. Their names were Gus Grissom, Ed White, and Roger Chaffee. During the test, a fire broke out inside the capsule. In seconds, the fire spread everywhere. The hatch, the door, could not be opened quickly from inside. All 3 astronauts died within minutes. The whole world was shocked. NASA stopped all flights for almost 2 years. Engineers completely redesigned the Apollo capsule. They changed the hatch so it could open outward quickly. They replaced materials inside the capsule that burned easily. The Apollo 1 fire was a tragedy. A tragedy is a terrible event that causes great sadness and loss. But it also forced NASA to slow down, fix the problems, and build something safer and stronger. Gus Grissom had once said, "If we die, we want people to accept it. The conquest of space is worth the risk of life." The program continued in his memory, in all 3 astronauts' memory. July 16, 1969, Kennedy Space Center, Florida, 9:32 in the morning. A rocket the height of a 36-story building stood on the launch pad. Flames and smoke billowed. Billowed means spread out in large, rolling clouds from its base. The rocket was called Saturn V. It was the most powerful rocket ever built. It produced 34 million newtons of thrust. Thrust is the force that pushes a rocket upward. It was so loud that the sound could be felt in the chest of people standing 5 kilometers away. Inside, at the very top, were 3 astronauts: Neil Armstrong, the mission commander; Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot; Michael Collins, the command module pilot. Neil Armstrong, the mission commander, calm, precise, and deeply intelligent. Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, confident and physically powerful. Michael Collins, the command module pilot, quiet, witty, and steady as a rock. 4 days later, on July 20th, 1969, the lunar module, a small spacecraft designed to land on the moon, separated from the main ship. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin climbed inside. Michael Collins stayed in orbit above the moon, waiting alone. Armstrong and Aldrin descended slowly toward the surface. The computer showed alarms. Warning lights blinked. The landing zone was full of boulders. Armstrong took manual control. He flew the spacecraft himself, searching for a flat, safe place to land. The fuel was running dangerously low. They had seconds left. Then, silence. "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed." At Mission Control in Houston, Texas, engineers burst into tears. People cheered. Some fell to their knees. 6 hours later, Neil Armstrong opened the hatch, climbed down the ladder, and placed his left boot on the surface of the moon. He said that's one small step for man, one giant leap for mankind. Mankind means all human beings, every person who has ever lived or will ever live. Approximately 600 million people on Earth watched on television. That was about 1/5 of the entire human population of the planet. For a few minutes, the Cold War did not exist. National borders did not exist. Political systems did not exist. There was only one word: human. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin had walked on the moon. The whole world had watched. The whole world had cheered. But then, something unexpected happened. People lost interest. The Apollo program continued. 12 astronauts in total walked on the moon between 1969 and 1972. They collected rocks. They drove a small electric vehicle, a lunar rover, across the dusty surface. They conducted scientific experiments. But television ratings dropped. Newspapers moved on to other stories. The public had seen the moon landing. They had celebrated. And now they wanted something new. The United States government began to cut NASA's budget. A budget is the total amount of money set aside for a specific purpose. Without enough money, NASA could not continue the Apollo missions. Apollo 17, in December 1972, was the last mission to the moon. Astronaut Eugene Cernan was the last person to stand on the lunar surface. He said, "We shall return with peace and hope for all mankind." He stepped back into the lunar module. The hatch closed. No human being has returned to the moon since that day. For many people, it felt like the dream was ending. But in reality, the story of space exploration was simply turning a new page. In the 1970s and 1980s, NASA had a new vision. Instead of building rockets that could only be used once, rockets that fell into the ocean after launch, why not build a spacecraft that could be used again and again? This became the Space Shuttle. The Space Shuttle was revolutionary. Revolutionary means so new and different that it changes everything. It looked like an airplane with a large fuel tank attached to its back. It launched vertically, straight up, like a rocket. It returned to Earth and landed horizontally, like an airplane on a runway. The first space shuttle flight was on April 12, 1981, exactly 20 years after Yuri Gagarin's historic flight. The shuttle was called Columbia. Astronauts John Young and Robert Crippen flew it safely into orbit and back. The space shuttle carried satellites into orbit. It carried telescopes. It carried science laboratories. It was a workhorse. A workhorse means something that works very hard and reliably over a long period of time. But the shuttle program also knew terrible tragedy. In January 1986, the Challenger shuttle broke apart just 73 seconds after launch. All 7 crew members were killed. Among them was Christa McAuliffe, a school teacher from New Hampshire, who had been selected to be the first civilian to fly in space. Millions of schoolchildren across America were watching the launch live on television. The nation grieved deeply. And then, in February 2003, the Columbia shuttle, the very first one, broke apart during re-entry. Re-entry is the process of a spacecraft returning into Earth's atmosphere from space. All 7 crew members were lost again. Twice, the Space Shuttle program had looked into the face of disaster. Twice, NASA had mourned, and twice, NASA had rebuilt. The Space Shuttle flew 135 missions in total before the program ended in 2011. It was flawed, it was costly, but it carried human beings to space for 30 years. In the 1990s, something remarkable began to happen. The Cold War had ended. The Soviet Union had collapsed, broken apart in 1991. Russia was now a different country, no longer an enemy of the United States. For the first time, former rivals sat down together and asked a new question. Not how do we beat each other in space, but how do we explore space together? The answer was the International Space Station, or the ISS. The ISS is a large laboratory that orbits the Earth approximately 400 kilometers above the surface. It travels at about 28,000 kilometers per hour, so fast that it orbits the entire Earth every 90 minutes. Building it required 15 nations working together: the United States, Russia, Japan, Canada, the nations of Europe. Each country contributed different sections, called modules, that were launched separately and connected in space. Piece by piece, like a giant puzzle assembled in orbit. The first crew arrived on November 2nd, 2000. Since that day, the ISS has been continuously inhabited. There has always been at least one human being living on it. That means humans have lived in space without interruption for over 25 years. On the ISS, astronauts conduct experiments. They study how the human body changes in zero gravity. They research new medicines. They observe the Earth below, the storms, the forests, the cities, the deserts. The ISS proved something powerful. It proved that nations who once pointed missiles at each other could instead build something beautiful together. That is not a small thing. That is an extraordinary thing. While humans lived and worked on the ISS, unmanned spacecraft with no humans inside, operated by computers and remote control, were venturing far deeper into the solar system. The solar system is the sun and everything that orbits it, all the planets, moons, asteroids, and comets held together by the sun's gravity. NASA sent the Voyager probes, Voyager 1 and Voyager 2, beyond the outer planets in 1977. They flew past Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune, sending back the first detailed photographs of those distant worlds. Today, Voyager 1 is the farthest human-made object in existence. It has traveled beyond our solar system entirely into interstellar space, which means between the stars. The Hubble Space Telescope, launched in 1990, looked deeper into the universe than any instrument before it. It showed us galaxies, massive collections of billions of stars forming, colliding, and dying billions of light years away. A light year is the distance light travels in 1 year, about 9.5 trillion kilometers. But perhaps no place captured the human imagination more than Mars. Mars is the fourth planet from the Sun. It is a cold, red, rocky desert world. Scientists believe that billions of years ago, Mars may have had liquid water on its surface. And where there is water, there may have been life. NASA sent rovers to Mars. Rovers are robotic vehicles that drive across the surface, collecting data and photographs. Sojourner landed in 1997. Spirit and Opportunity arrived in 2004. Curiosity landed in 2012. And Perseverance landed in 2021, carrying a small helicopter called Ingenuity, the first aircraft ever to fly on another planet. Each rover found new evidence: ancient riverbeds, minerals formed by water, organic molecules, the basic chemical building blocks of life. Mars was no longer just a red dot in the night sky. It was a destination. For most of the 20th century, space belonged to governments. Only nations had the money and power to launch rockets. Then, a new kind of explorer arrived. His name was Elon Musk. Musk was born in South Africa in 1971. He was not a scientist. He was not a military pilot. He was a technology entrepreneur. An entrepreneur is someone who builds new businesses, often by taking bold risks with new ideas. He had already built PayPal, an online payment company, and Tesla, an electric car company. But his deepest dream was something far larger. He wanted to make human beings a multiplanetary species. Multiplanetary means living on more than one planet. He believed that humanity needed to become a backup, a copy, a safety system, in case something terrible happened to the Earth. In 2002, he founded SpaceX, Space Exploration Technologies Corporation. The first 3 SpaceX rocket launches all failed. The 4th launch, in September 2008, finally succeeded, but SpaceX was nearly out of money. Musk later admitted he had been dividing his last remaining funds between Tesla and SpaceX, knowing that if both failed, he would lose everything. But they didn't fail. SpaceX achieved something that nobody had ever done before: a reusable orbital rocket booster. A booster is the large lower section of a rocket that provides the main thrust at launch. After delivering its payload, its cargo, into space, the SpaceX Falcon 9 booster would fly itself back and land vertically on a drone ship in the ocean or back at the launch site. It looked like science fiction. The first time people watched a rocket booster land itself upright, many viewers thought the video was playing backwards. SpaceX also built the Dragon capsule, a spacecraft that carries astronauts to the International Space Station, restoring America's ability to launch its own astronauts from its own soil, which it had lost after the space shuttle retired. And then SpaceX began building something even bigger. Starship, the largest and most powerful rocket ever built, designed to carry 100 people at a time, designed for missions to the Moon and Mars. The dream of Tsiolkovsky, of Goddard, of Korolev, of von Braun, of Kennedy, the dream of humans leaving Earth and going deeper into the solar system, was now in the hands of a private company. The new space age had arrived. Our story began with a deaf boy in Russia sitting at a wooden desk by candlelight, writing equations that nobody read. It moved through a young man in a Massachusetts cherry tree, dreaming of Mars. It passed through a Nazi rocket that crossed the edge of space, through the beep, beep, beep of Sputnik, through Gagarin's single word, Poyakali, let's go, through Kennedy's impossible promise, through 3 astronauts who died in a fire and 7 who died in 2 shuttle disasters. And it arrived, step by step, failure by failure, dream by dream, at the Moon, at Mars, at the edge of the solar system. What does this story teach us? It teaches us that human beings are at their core explorers. Exploration is not a luxury, something extra and unnecessary. Exploration is a need. It is built into us. We are not content to stay in one place. We always look at the horizon and ask, what is beyond that? It teaches us that progress, real progress, the kind that changes the world, is never clean. It is never easy. It is always paid for with struggle, with sacrifice, and sometimes with lives. Sacrifice means giving up something precious for a greater goal. It teaches us that rivalry, competition between nations or people, can sometimes drive humans to achieve things they would never achieve alone. The space race was born from fear and politics. But it gave us the moon landing, satellites, weather forecasting, GPS navigation, cancer-detecting technology, and hundreds of other innovations that improve daily life. And perhaps most importantly, it teaches us that the universe is incomprehensibly large. Incomprehensibly means too large or complex to fully understand. There are more stars in the observable universe than grains of sand on every beach on Earth. We have taken one small step. There are infinite steps ahead. As Konstantin Tsiolkovsky wrote over a century ago, Earth is the cradle of humanity. But one cannot remain in the cradle forever. The cradle is behind us. The stars are ahead. Hey there, just a second before you go. If you learned something new today, please give this video a like. Write your thoughts in the comments and subscribe to the channel. It only takes a second, and it really helps to create even better English videos for you. Your support means the world. Thank you.